This portion of the CU podcast is brought to you by The Perfect Gene. You know how most podcast sponsorships sound fake? Well, The Perfect Gene folks handed me this script to read word for word, including this sentence. They also gave me these jeans in real talk. I put them through hell and back, and they're flawless, stretchy, comfortable, durable, and just amazing. But is that my real opinion or just a script? Well, today's sponsor, The Perfect Gene, finally solved all your denim difficulties. They make great looking, perfect fitting jeans that are as comfortable as sweatpants.
For a limited time, our listeners get 15% off their first order plus free shipping at theperfectgene.nyc or Google The Perfect Gene and use code CUPodcast15 for 15% off. I'm actually wearing them right now. They're super comfortable.
I've worn these out to have fun eating, fish tacos with friends, getting drinks, going shopping for groceries. I've got a couple different colors here. I got the minor gray and I got the blue here, and they are comfortable and stretchy, and I like them a lot. It's finally time to stop crushing your balls in uncomfortable jeans by going to theperfectgene.nyc. Our listeners get 15% off your first order plus free shipping, free returns, and free exchanges when you use code CUPodcast15 at checkout. That's 15% off for all new customers at theperfectgene.nyc with promo code CUPodcast15. After you purchase, they'll ask where you heard about them. Please support the CU podcast and tell them we sent you. F your khakis and get the perfect gene. This was announced, Ian. It was announced a week before the SoCal Gaming Expo, but now there was a tie-in with the SoCal Gaming Expo through the Classic World Tetris Championship. The ModRetro, which is an aftermarket...
ModRetro is the company. The product is the Chromatic.
The ModRetro marketing is over. So ModRetro Chromatic, it's an aftermarket Game Boy that's, aluminum casing, really nice buttons is being advertised. It is a Game Boy and Game Boy Color player, FPGA, I believe.
It is.
It's supposed to be, exact pixel perfect original screen of the original.
Color tones.
Things of that nature. And they sponsored the Classic World Tetris Championship that happened at SoCal a week and a half ago. And they actually showed off the Chromatic there. And I wish I knew. I did not know I was there. I did not know it was being showed off. I would have loved to have held the thing and actually, tried it out. But it was announced, and there was a tie-in with the Tetris tournament that I'm slightly uncomfortable with, that we'll talk about first. But Ian, let's go over the specs of what this is if you want to go over some of the more important stuff.
All right, so the ModRetro, it's going to cover the Game Boy and Game Boy Color libraries, some sort of sapphire screen filter, and then a screen with the exact resolution of the Game Boy and Game Boy Color.
Magnesium shell, that's the metal they're using.
It uses FPGA, as you said, and is all around a recreation of a Game Boy Color in a fancier shell, and it's $200.
And includes a
new version of Tetris, which they showed off at the
tournament.
At SoCal.
They played it at the tournament.
Yes, and it looks nice. It looks like it's Tetris. It's Tetris, but it looks good.
Game Boy Color Tetris.
Looks clean, modern.
Basically, yeah.
And does it have headphones as well?
They're offering the headphones separately. Which I'll go over. Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to... Okay. Looking at this as just a product up front, and I've had plenty of things to say about analog, both good and not good. I do not understand why this exists in a world... I can understand why it exists because he explains why it exists. I don't understand what the market is for this in a world that has the analog pocket. In a world that has the analog pocket more regularly in stock these days than usual for 200 and what is it, 50? I think is what it got.
It was 220, correct?
It either went from 200 to 220 or from 220 to 250.
Sure, I'll tell you in a second.
And their shipping is kind of a bit much, which is usually like $20 flat for anything you order from them.
It's still 220. It's out of stock currently.
It went from 200 to 220. So all said, you can get the pocket for about $250. There is heavy emphasis from the head of this project, Palmer Luckey, about painful attention to detail about what's going on here.
Screen,
the buttons, complaints about the clock being off in a minuscule way, and the resolution of the colors not being 100% perfect. Maybe that does matter to some people. As a personal project, which is what he states it is, he's a billionaire. They have money to throw at whatever the fuck they want.
Real quick, who is Palmer Luckey? Palmer Luckey founded Oculus. Then they eventually sold it to Facebook, who overpaid by probably a couple billion.
Yep.
And then now he runs a defense contracting company, and they do drone tech and I think defense surveillance towers. So that's what Palmer does now.
So, so that's why it exists. That's why it's being made, is because he's bored and this is what he wants to do.
It's a pet
pet hobby that is being sold. But I don't think those differences are going to matter to a wide variety of people. People who are incredibly deep into technical aspects of systems, upscaling, emulation, FPGA, people like our friends over at My Life in Gaming. No one has made complaints about these things until now, or very few. These complaints have suddenly come up. It's like this product was finding complaints to make about the Analog Pocket.
Well, Palmer was making them on his own Twitter feed.
Right. Okay.
He was doing comparisons between,
Gotcha.
look how the colors look between these two, and someone else was like, I can't get those same colors. Like the lighting was on the pocket where he was trying to conjure up. It looked like certain weird differences that may or may not exist.
And I'm not saying no one noticed them, but it has not been, this is not a scandal. This has not ruined the Analog Pocket. No one has complained about the Analog Pocket.
It's out of stock.
Really, for these reasons.
Either way.
The other issue with this is by using that, and there has been no talk, I don't believe, about access to the FPGAs in here that run the Game Boy Color, boards. But because of the screen that was chosen for this, anything else is going to look fucked up on this. That's not Game Boy or Game Boy Color. And I checked with people. The resolution is such that if you try to shove things into this resolution, you're going to get squished stuff. You're going to get, you're going to get missing pixels. You're not going to be able to do Game Boy Advance or TurboGrafx or Super Nintendo or NES. So all of the usual FPGA is great in terms of its accuracy, but we're at a point right now, even with analog products in the pocket, where the FPGA in toying around with the FPGA is part of the appeal. And you could probably do that with this, but you're not. But to what end? For what reason?
You're saying you're locked into this.
You are locked into
pixel perfect screen that hasn't existed in 25 years, and now you're locked in. It's gonna be harder to break out of.
If all you want to do is play Game Boy and Game Boy Color, I get it. But there are modded Game Boy Colors that you can buy with beautiful screens, and it's just, I understand to a point that there are issues that people have found with the Pocket. I don't think anyone cares enough to lock themselves into a Game Boy and Game Boy Color only player because of those issues. Yes. Now, so there's that. Then, so I think it's a tough sell from that angle, and I don't think anyone was really focused on that when this was announced, because people were like, oh, it's a new Analog Pocket, but it's not.
I mean, yeah, we're not even. I think we're kind of burrowing a semi-lead.
Okay, what were you going to say?
I mean, talk about Super Nintendo. Like, it doesn't have the number of buttons that these other consoles have either.
Right, it doesn't. You're right. I didn't even think about that.
Yeah.
So you're using this fancy. You're using this fancy tech, but you are locking yourself into a very, very limited. Swath of games. Yeah. And I love the Game Boy. I love the Game Boy Color. I'm part of a Game of the Month site, with my buddy Rick, that we've done forever, that covers just Game Boy games. Like, if there was a person this should have appealed to, It was me.
Yeah, they got a pink one.
Yeah.
They got a pink
If there was a
one.
person it should have appealed to, it'd be me. It's one of my favorite
several
systems
colors.
of all time. But I personally don't care enough about the differences.
You
to
don't care
consider
about
this.
the PBT buttons or the magnesium metal case?
I don't. And I will say this because I can't not say it, but I think it's very bold to take a product like this that is going to have a limited market appeal and then make Palmer fucking Luckey your spokesperson.
Well, he's running the company, I guess.
Yes, but still, I mean, that
He's a polarizing figure. Obviously.
polarizing. He has shit politics and he's a defense contractor. I have no respect for the guy. Sure, he's got billions of dollars, but I'm not the only one who feels that way. It's not going to matter to a lot of people, but it's still, that's a bold marketing move.
Sure. Okay, that's a lot for me to respond to. Where I start? I want to start with he's already Tommy Tallaricoing himself as being the head of this project in marketing, and that's not good if, as Ian said, some of the people don't respect you or like you. Because already you're going to turn off from a marketing perspective. He doesn't give a shit if he's a billionaire.
No, because at the end of the day, none of this matters because he doesn't need the money.
Well, I'll get to that. Well, I'll get to why that's actually bad and not good.
Okay.
That part. Yeah, I'm structuring this in my head.
Sorry.
No, that's fine. But he's responding with some vitriol and some of his comments on Twitter to people as like, hey, this is here's the good. This is the good. I'll start with the good. It's always good to have competing products on the market. And if his heart is literally coming from, I love the Game Boy Color, God bless you. Put your 17 years of research into making this. If it fails on its face, at least we know that your heart was in the right place and some people will enjoy it. Like, that's the positive, right? Like, we can agree on that. Like, that's positive. Another Game Boy. People like Game Boy. Buy it. Enjoy it. He wants to keep retro alive.
Wipe the bullshit from him. I have no issue with his desire to make this.
Correct. But now we go into the marketing and then what's behind it. So he's answering some questions on here, and he's taking shots at Analog whenever he gets a chance. This is a startup in terms of like, this is their first video game product, right?
Right.
And we always talk about the danger of that with other companies, with the Amico and with whatever else, the fucking Retro Engine Sigma and all these fly-by-night companies, Dreamcade. And I'm not saying that he doesn't have more resources than that, but you still can fall under similar pitfalls if you're not careful, especially when you don't have a track record of coming out with this stuff and then being able to support and things like that. And it doesn't matter how much money you have, you can succumb to your own pitfalls, especially if this is like a glorified hobby for you. Or it's like, I'm not saying Palmer would not have integrity enough to not support the product in a year or two if something happened. Say like, for example, with the Playdate in Teenage Engineering, they had issues with the battery, right?
Panic.
Panic.
Teenage Engineering did the design.
Yeah. But either way, the same company, they're all working together.
Yes.
They had a major battery issue.
Yeah.
And that's a company with track record. They had to delay it. They had faulty batteries. It can happen to a company even with the track record, let alone this is our first product. It's a passion of ours. We're going to put it out for the good of the Game Boy community. What to say? You can still have these same issues that arrive. And in his Kickstarter, in the promotional video they put out, he kept saying this wasn't a good idea or this was not good for business. And that's bad. And this is why. Because even if you have money to burn, rich people still don't like losing money. That's how they get rich. A lot of them or stay rich. So you can say, I don't care about money right now, but what if this becomes a bigger flop or there's more issues than even Palmer can suspect and it starts burning fucking money? And for him, it might be a small amount of money, but it's still a large amount of money. And he just says one day, fuck it, I'm done with this experiment. I want to drop it. Or pass it off to someone else who doesn't care. I'm not saying it's going to happen. I'm not saying Palmer will do that, but there's the possibility of that happening when someone like his livelihood does not depend upon this. He does not need the money from this to survive or to make a living. That can actually be bad.
Well, it's also tacky for two reasons. One, the more obvious one, it's tacky because, the talking about money and whatever. But two, that sort of preemptive defensiveness
Yep.
is always very tacky, because what you're trying to do is get out in front of criticism and say that criticism doesn't matter. You're trying to cut yourself off from an entire line of criticism by saying it doesn't matter. I don't need the money. You don't have to answer questions like, who's going to buy this? Who's this for? What places does this have in the market, in the industry? Because you just go, blah, 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 I'm rich, it doesn't matter. But these are questions that...
Well, let me read some of this now.
Yeah.
Silent Rocco, great name, says, the Analog Pocket might want to have a war with this. Competition is always nice, though, and it looks great. But the marketing speech in this video made me go, yeah, right, more than once. All the best thing with this, that's seemingly too high quality to make you any money. Palmer responds, I am a billionaire. Okay.
Yep.
He just dismisses it. Next person says, how is this any better than the Analog Pocket? Open source, even though Pocket supports Open FPGA, that aside. Metal shell, sapphire screen lens, clock speed actually correct. So I'm guessing he'll show examples, if he hasn't, of like the Pocket being slightly off on some things. I don't know. I have no fucking clue on that, but the fact that it says actually correct. Display structure, color temp, etc. is correct. Daylight viewable.
So's the Analog Pocket.
I was gonna say, is a Pocket not daylight viewable?
I can see it in the daylight.
Okay. Much better battery life. Okay, we'll see how that works out. Not that I've heard complaints about the Pocket's battery life, but okay.
It's not bad. It's fine.
It's like 8 hours or so?
I would say that if the battery life could be, it depends. It seems like sometimes it drains faster than other times, depending on what I'm playing. I don't know.
I think they advertise 8 hours.
It's not awful.
Yeah. I think he's advertising.
But I think it's not awful. I don't think it's unrealistic for him to say that this has better battery life.
He's saying 24 hours for that. Maybe he has chunkier batteries, years later, better. He says the list goes on and on. So the next person says supplies are limited. This is quoting the site. And while ModRetro will undoubtedly make other products in the future, we won't be making any more of these. The person says not a fan of planned obsolescence. That indicates the future support will also disappear and future firmware / BIOS bugs won't get fixed. Palmer says stupid comment. The same could be argued for the original Game Boy.
No.
Stable products have nothing to do with planned obsolescence, especially not when the entire point is to clone obsolete hardware. Okay. This is where it becomes Tallarico-esque, because he's already comparing an upstart video game company with Nintendo, which by the Game Boy had a very well-established track record.
Well, and he's also comparing it to, directly, this is what he's talking about, he's comparing one limited run of this console to Game Boy eventually ceasing production after a decade.
Yeah.
A decade of support.
Yeah.
That's not a comparison. It does not make any sense.
And we're talking about scale. If Nintendo, say, found a bug in a product, which I don't believe they ever did with the game, but as far as I know, but they can put out revisions with the manpower and infrastructure they had.
Right.
Or very, very, very worst case scenario, say there was some weird thing that happened on the first batch of Game Boys, they could have recalled them and it wouldn't have hurt them.
Right.
This company can't, do that without Palmer saying, oh, this isn't worth my time. I'm in over my head. So that's what I mean. You get responses like that, which even if he is totally competent and this comes out as a success, look very bad on its surface to respond this way directly to folks. It's a bad look as the CEO of a company to do that.
Well, and the I don't care attitude is also a bad look, reminiscent of Tommy, and is just being used to sidestep reasonable criticism.
Yeah. Yeah, like I said, there was a one picture comparison where we said, look how washed out the colors were. There was a brightness comparison versus the Analog Pocket, but the light was shining differently. And some person responded saying oh, I can't see that difference in mine. And the Analog Pocket has so many different options and different color things you can do with it anyway, right? And
I won't even say he's wrong. I'm just saying,
is it that big of a difference?
Is it that big of a deal? Is that big of a difference?
So again, you're right. Who is this for? Original Game Boy and Game Boy Color lovers only that to this point in time have not found a way to go back and get the quintessential way of playing this without owning an original, or like you said, modding theirs, and also thought the Analog Pocket wasn't good enough. You're talking about a very slim portion of people on the pie chart, right? That would be into that.
I think some people will buy this specifically just to support Palmer Luckey. There are people who will buy this specifically for Palmer Luckey,
like Elon Musk cult members.
Yeah,
in the
that sort
Cybertruck.
of thing. That sort of
That
thing.
will almost crush their finger off to show that the Cybertruck's trunk works correctly. It doesn't.
Right. And I have no doubt about this probably selling well. I really don't, because it's good. It has a target market without actually needing to be useful, and that's what I'm trying to kind of say about the cult of personality.
This is why I don't think it'll sell extremely well. Like I said, if they make, like, say they say make 10,000, they sell them. Okay.
I think they're going to sell out.
But okay, well, here's the thing. He partnered in some way. We'll talk about with Logan Paul. Logan Paul showed up at the SoCal Gaming Expo that Friday for the tournament. It was like the exhibition bracket. He played Chris Tang and beat him he beat him in the first round. Chris Tang, who's been a major Tetris competitor for 30 years and expert at it. But okay,
Suspect.
And then lost to Scooty, who we covered in the second round.
Mm-hmm.
So they sponsored the tournament. So they were playing on the Chromatic, and then that's how they were doing it for the competition instead of using the classic.
Right.
That's the weird part about it. It's the classic Tetris World Championship, meaning classic, meaning like the original Tetris from the NES. But that aside, that's a small caveat. They're sponsoring. You got to show the product there. Logan Paul has tweeted about this. He mentioned being at the tournament on SmackDown. So like there's a relationship he has with Palmer here. And I will not say whether or not it's paid. I have no idea. But if it has been paid, it has been disclosed from what I've seen.
Right.
To promote this. He's tweeted about this. And I'm not saying Logan Paul isn't allowed to like this, but I don't think Logan Paul is doing all this out of the business, doing business with in this way out of the goodness of his heart. Like there has to be like, hey, you're going to show up at the tournament that I'm sponsoring, and you're going to play the Tetris game on the console that we're coming out with. Like, unless they're good friends, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe
they are.
Maybe Logan's good friends with Palmer Luckey and just did it as a favor. But, and I saw Casey Neistat, a big YouTuber, had one already. So if he has the marketing bucks, you're right. Maybe they can sell some. But that target market, like the average age of Logan Paul's fans, was not alive to play the Game Boy.
True.
They were not. Or Game Boy Color. They were 2 years old when the Game Boy Color was defunct in the early 2000s. Like they're not, like that's not a target audience that meshes with it. You're gonna have to teach them about the Game Boy and Game Boy Color games. But there is a shop already at the ModRetro.com where you can buy Chromatic / Game Boy Color games.
I mean, to not to give him credit, but I will say this is one thing that I actually like about this product is there is, if it was not, linked to who it's linked to, there is there's talk at least of a program here where homebrew devs can send them the games and pitches and they would cover the manufacturing for a split. I don't think the production of Game Boy games is necessarily super expensive because so many people, including people who have games being advertised here, such as the Traumatarium Pentient, which is a sequel to Traumatarium, which is a game that I know of. I haven't played it. But like the people who are here have done that before. So
they know enough.
I guess what I'm saying is it's not an insurmountable barrier that they are taking off the shoulders of these people, but it's interesting to get. It's interesting to see a
ecosystem.
Someone try to work an ecosystem out for homebrew devs.
Sure,
that's about all I'll say about it. But I do think that's kind of cool.
Yeah,
that's it.
It's fine. If they're going to say, I didn't see the mention of that in the article I saw, but if it's a fair split, if they don't need the money, then front most of the costs and pay us back as it sells. So it's like no risk to you. That would be cool.
And the games are not obviously locked to the Chromatic. So these are games that you can play on a Game Boy Color. So if it gets so again, don't like Palmer, but if it's helping people get their Game Boy games out into the wild in good quality packaging and things like that, that at least is something I can see as a benefit. But but that's really the only benefit I can see of this project.
Sure. So yeah, so there you go. I mean, I guess we'll see how this develops. If the product comes out and people get what they paid for, great. That's great. There's just some things on the surface that are weird. And again, I just don't. I think the shots at analog were unnecessary. You can say this can be the superior product without like going on Twitter and like doing little cheap pictures on your phone showing the screen comparisons. I just think it's tacky. I think it's tacky. And if you're going to sell them, let's put it this way: if you can't sell a decent amount, getting Logan Paul involved, then like I said, you're kind of crossing up audiences because Logan Paul's audience has no idea what the analog pocket even is.
Yeah, but remember, he doesn't care.